Boom. Texas Longhorns get another commitment. This one from a young man out of Fort Bend, Marshall, Caleb Chester, a cornerback, Jerry, that Terry Joseph and Steve Sarkisian kind of identified early. Held off A&M, LSU, TCU, Arkansas, among others. He visited Texas over the weekend and commits to the Longhorns. What do you think about the young man out of Fort Bend, Marshall, Caleb Chester?
Yeah, I think, I've been over there 3 times throughout his recruitment to Fort Bend Marshall High. A spring visit, when I sat down, did an interview with him that's on Texas Football, it was so impressive from a video standpoint, just talking with him. He's a student of the game. He's a guy who studies a lot of film. So he instantly is an attractive cornerback prospect to Terry Joseph, Steve Sarkisian, because it's just the way he studies the game, the way he approaches the game. And when talking with the Fort Bend Marshall staff, he got serious about the weight room in the last year, and he's added about 12 to 15 pounds to that frame, and he's grown a little bit as well. He's grown about half an inch, so he's a little over 6 foot. He's up to about 170, 172 pounds. So he's he's done all the right things to be a high-level prospect. And look, he's a guy that, as you said, Terry Joseph, Blake Gideon, they identified him early. That's Blake's school. He recruits the school. Obviously, Terry Joseph's the defensive backs, cornerbacks coach. But Texas identified him early. Steve Sarkisian was by the school in January to see Caleb Chester as well. He had been on campus unofficially a couple times before. But this official visit with his parents, it put it over the top for Texas. And how talented is Caleb Chester? I mean, Texas A&M has 3 or 4 corners committed, and they haven't even backed off of him. And by the way, Caleb Chester comes from Fort Bend Marshall, one of the most talented programs, skills programs in the Houston area, one of the best track programs in the country.
I'm looking at him at 6'1", 170. Saw a bunch of pictures of him over the weekend, Jerry, and he has got some long arms to him. Yeah. Is he a corner? Is he a nickel? Could he be a couple different spots for Texas? What are your thoughts here?
He said corner or nickel. Colleges are recruiting him at both. I think he starts his career at corner at the University of Texas, and they'll go from there. I think there's some similarities with him to Javion Cole. I really do. He may not run 10-6-7 like Javion Cole did, but I see some similarities in these guys. Just the way they study the game, way they approach the game. He's a really good man press corner, but he can also play off. But I think you see a lot of press with him, a lot of aggressiveness, a lot of body quickness, reactive quickness to him. But I think he's going to begin his career at corner, and I think that's likely where he sticks. But he could play nickel within the scheme as well.
Comes in and has 21 tackles on the season as a junior. Also played as a sophomore for a very talented Fort Bend Marshall team. 8 pass breakups, Jerry. A cornerback. Texas in the market for several DBs in this recruiting class of 2025. Where's your sense of how many of each position they're going to try to take now that Caleb Chester is certainly one of those?
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 corners, and one of those guys, like you said, could play some nickel too. Aiden Anding is a top target for Texas. Obviously, Dorian Brew from Conroe High is a top target for Texas at corner. They're bringing in Devin Williams from Buford, committed to Auburn at corner. Devin Williams out of Buford, Georgia, who's committed to Auburn as a corner. They're bringing him in the 21st through 23rd as well. I think he's probably behind the other guys. I think with Caleb Chester on the board now, Texas loves Aiden Anding, and who doesn't if you've gone out to see him in person? Aiden Anding's very talented. And then Dorian Brew, obviously at corner, who was at USC this weekend. But at safety, I think Cade Phillips, DB/safety. Cade Phillips is a guy for sure. And then, what's interesting, Bobby, is Chinook Hines was on campus last weekend at Texas. He could be a receiver. He could be a safety. He's a heck of an athlete, one of the best athletes in the country.
I've got to ask this because we've made a big deal about this. Texas trying to get back in the Fort Bend area of the state of the city of Houston area. Long considered one of the premier stops in the state as far as talent, but Texas has not had a lot of help, a lot of results there of late. But Caleb Chester and hopefully a guy like Cade Phillips, you mentioned, possibly changing that this year.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. There's 3 schools in Fort Bend ISD. Texas really needs to be strong in. That's Marshall High from a skill perspective. That's Hightower from a skills perspective that also has some big guys from time to time. Then it's Ridge Point. That's over in Siena, an area a lot of pro athletes, kids are coming up. Sean Rogers' daughter's a SMU volleyball commitment. TJ Ford's son's, one son's graduate. He'll come through there. Ndukwe Kalu's son came through that Siena, came out of Siena, Ridge Point High area, and is a D lineman at Baylor. There's a lot of talent at Ridge Point. Those are 3 schools that Texas has to be strong in. But this is a really good start because I'm telling you, Fort Bend Marshall now, Caleb Chester's the headliner in 2025, and Jacalyn Ferguson. They have another kid who's really talented as well. 26, though, the safety Isaiah Williams, one of the very best in the country. He's been a top target for Blake Gideon for a while. The linebacker, Noriel Dominguez, the 26 linebacker, has an offer from Texas. So you start to look at that. Fort Bend Marshall has a number of skill guys coming up, as does Hightower. You mentioned Cade Phillips. They have some younger guys coming up. And Ridge Point's one of the most talented all-around programs in the Houston area right now.
Well, it's interesting because Texas has done okay in Houston in the past few recruiting classes. Trey Owens, Jordan Washington, Nate Kibble from last year. And then even before that, I mean, Kelvin Banks, for example, is out of that Humble area, but not so much on the west side of town. So interesting if the Longhorns can get that going like they did. I mean, there was a time when Texas did really well out that way. Of course, TJ Ford from Willow Ridge High School himself, a guy that we talk about a lot. The other thing that I would say here and ask you, Jerry, is what are his strengths? Like, if you're really, you talked about his intelligence.
Yes.
And I talked about his arm length. He looks like he mirrors really, really well in the passing game. You mentioned Javion Cole as a comparison. Is that what you see out of Caleb Chester?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that is a film junkie, is a football junkie, and really, truly loves the game. I think that is his strength. Yeah, he's got the size. He's got the arm length. He's got the quick feet, the reactive quickness. And he's a physical kid. He's not scared to stick his neck in there in run defense, in the run force. But I really just like that he's a film study guy in the way he attacks football. I think it's he's one of those guys, Bobby, he's maybe not as highly ranked as some other guys nationally, and I think that puts a little chip on his shoulder. He's a very competitive kid. But when I talked to him at Link there at Marshall earlier in the spring, it was just, he was talking coverages. He was talking what he can do in each coverage. And if you haven't seen that video, it's an On Texas Football Archives video. But how much he studies film. And then when you talk to the Marshall coaches, how dedicated he is to the game. That's a lot of similar things. Obviously, they've been said about Manny Muhammad. I'm not comparing him as a prospect, but have been said about Manny Muhammad. And he kind of gives off that vibe of a mature kid as a junior, going to be senior in high school. You like his maturity and the way he's approaching this process and then approaching wanting to be the best football player he can be, because he's got the skill set, he's got the frame, he's got the talent, and he plays against really good competition.
Well, I mean, he is the first commitment from the city of Houston or the Houston area. If you are for this recruiting class of 2025, if you don't include Jackson Christian, who's really more Golden Triangle out at Port Neches Groves. So a big pickup here for the Longhorns, a successful recruiting weekend overall. The Longhorns had 7 different official visitors on campus. Jerry, a big pickup overall. This gets us going into the next group of guys that start getting on campus this coming week and the week after, et cetera. It'll be interesting to see exactly where Texas tries to go here by the end of July or by the end of June, where official visits will stop for a month or so. You feel good about where Texas is at right now?
Oh, I feel very good about where Texas is at. You're not going to get all the guys. I mean, look, Texas bringing in 45 official visitors in the month of June. I mean, there's extremely talented players there. There's a lot of national battles. You're in the Southeast battling. You're in California battling, all battling national programs. I think when the dust settles, Texas will have a class considered for a 4th straight top 5 class. Does that finish 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th? I don't know that right now. But the talent level that Texas is bringing in on official visits that will fill out this class is going to be very high, and then that of another top 5 level class. The question now becomes, for me, maybe more importantly, is are they filling all the needs in this class? Could it be a top-heavy class at a couple of positions? like a wide receiver spot, like offensive line maybe. But are they going to fill those? The top heavy at linebacker possibly. Are they going to fill those needs? And the two big needs I had in this class were interior D-line and then secondary. And we'll have to see where Texas goes at those two positions. If they hit on enough of their top targets at those positions and they're ranked with the top 5 class, it's going to be a top 5 class that fills all the needs headed in the portal season.
All right, I got one more thing for you guys. Rod Babers, about a week ago, did a little breakdown of Caleb Chester. Rod, of course, a former NFL defensive back, cornerback, also a Houston native, wanted to talk a little bit about Caleb because he liked what he saw. So what follows this immediately is a little breakdown of Caleb Chester by Rod Babers. But for now, for Gerry Hamilton and myself, I want to say this. Caleb Chester, hook him.
All right, folks, time to give you my evaluation of Caleb Chester, the cornerback out of Houston. Listen, I'm really hard on the DBs because I myself am a card-carrying member of DBU there in Texas. But I'll say usually when I'm looking at prospects in the back 7, I like to group them into 3 different categories or a technician, a disruptor, or a ball hawk. And one thing you notice about Caleb Chester, he's a technician at playing the cornerback position. There's a lot to love about his game. He's got great range at the cornerback position, number 1. You would notice that in the clips. He's got to play zone coverage. I mean, look how he can cover a lot of space, covering that deep third or covering that deep fourth. Very disciplined in his eyes, reading his keys. Look at there. Reading number 2, able to come off number 1 seamlessly. And one thing you also notice watching his game, and I wrote this down in my notes, he acutely and accurately, astutely is aware of angles, right? He does a great job of cutting off receivers' path on their routes. Also does a great job playing bump and run coverage of being able to cut off a receiver at the point of attack and use angles to the football, whether you're talking about off coverage, being able to cut off receivers or being able to intercept their path, or whether you're talking about in bump and run coverage. So I love that. That's something that's natural. Guy that even when he's breaking on the football, you can tell his aiming point is the upfield shoulder. So just keenly aware of angles, and football a lot of times comes down to those angles. So I like that naturally about his game. He also has different methods of press. You'll even see here. That's why I call him a technician, right? The great athletes can go up and play press in high school. That's not a problem. But to have different methods of press, right? As a guy, you can see the inch technique. You can see the shadow technique. You got the one-hand jab you see there. He's got the 2-hand press technique as well. That's also something you can observe on film. He's got a lot in his repertoire. For a young player, that means you've been studying the game. That means you've been studying the cornerback position to have different methods of playing bump and run. You got to have a lot in your tool bag so that you never know what situation is going to arise and what method or what technique you're going to need to use in that particular moment. So you'd like to have a lot of them available, and he does. That's why I call him a technician. Love that about his game. He'll fit in any scheme. Doesn't matter if it's a heavy zone scheme, heavy man scheme. I mean, the truth is teams are playing more and more bump and run coverage. It goes all the way up to the NFL level, right? 60% of your passing game at the NFL level is quick game. Ball's coming out in 3 steps. That means the ball's coming out in a little over 2 seconds. If the ball comes out that quick or a little under 2 seconds or a little over 2 seconds, then your pass rush is nullified. What can disrupt that? Bump and run cornerbacks, bump and run defensive backs, guys who are not only coverage specialists, but like this young man, Caleb Chester, they are press coverage specialists. They can get up there and disrupt and redirect wide receivers right there at the line of scrimmage. He has the ability to do that. He's got the length, 6'1", maybe hovering around even maybe 6'2". He's got good frame, but I love the fact that he's a guy you can trust in bump and run coverage. Sark wants to play more bump and run coverage, but he's not the only one. Everybody does. In an RPO world that we live in, you throw the quick game in there with the RPO. RPO is essentially an amalgamation of the quick game and the run game, and you're becoming more of an RPO league, more of an RPO game. So Sark understands got to play bump and run coverage. Why? Because he knows that's what would disrupt his RPO passing game, would be corners that can play bump and run coverage. Now, that's a rarity. Getting corners and DBs that can play press confidently and be consistent in their technique, those are not easy to find. Usually guys who are playing press are gambling a lot and they end up getting torched throughout a game. Here's a young man, I think, that can do it consistently, and I think that's a really a confidence in his game, the maturity in this game. Also, something else I liked about this young man and what I saw from him, I also love the fact that, he's one of those guys that he's sticky in press coverage. I think there are certain things that you just cannot coach or teach, and you got to recruit those. And honestly, there are certain traits, right? Big guy being tall, wingspan, length, speed, of course, being one of those things. I think coverage is also one of them. I think coverage is natural. I think some guys are natural coverage guys and coverage specialists, and some guys don't. They don't read body language really well. They don't have really flexible hips. Their eyes are undisciplined. Guys who don't have the feet to play man-to-man coverage. There are some guys who just have those tools and naturally they are naturally more gifted at playing man, and some guys who aren't. I think Caleb Chester is one of those guys that can play man coverage. So I think you recruit things you can't coach coverage. I think pass rush ability is also, and I think guys are kind of naturally inclined to be great pass rushers. So I would recruit those traits, and I think that's what they're recruiting with a guy like Caleb Chester. You get him on campus, you got a natural coverage specialist, but not only that, the added bonus of a press coverage specialist who's great understanding angles to the football. That's what I love about his game mentally, is that this is a guy that kind of naturally understands the angles that as a defender you have to be disciplined in, or you're going to end up a lot of the times in foot races that you're going to lose. You're going to end up in situations where you are taking a bad angle to the football and a guy gets behind you. I didn't see much of that on film, if any of that on film with him. So that's what I love about Caleb Chester's game, a technician, and overall a guy that can be a press coverage specialist in any situation.